I'm Jennifer. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date's January 12th of 1992. I have a sponsor. Her name is Debbie A. I have a home group. It's the Midtown group in Wilmington. We meet on Mondays and Thursdays. If you're ever in Wilmington, we'd love to have you. Thank you, Wallace. Even though I'm your second choice to be here, I'm still honored to be here. Actually, there's very few people that, in the circumstances of my current week that I have like a big surgery that's coming up and just a lot of kind of crazy things going on in my life. And there's only a few people that I would say yes to this commitment tonight. And I will tell you that Wallace is one of those people that I could not say no to. And my sponsor yelled at me via text message when she found out that I was coming here tonight, because and she does that often, but I think it's kind of a good thing, because usually I yell at my girls if they're not doing enough. And my sponsor usually yells at me because I say yes too often. But that's just kind of how I was brought up in AA. And if I can do it, I'm gonna make sure that I show up, And so it's always an honor and a privilege to participate in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, but also, to be able to be present for people and to show up, you people and my giants in AA, guys like Wallace and Tom and even Steve, showed me the way of what a commitment is and what that means, and showing up and getting here early and cleaning up afterwards. My home group, I learned those things from those guys because I didn't know any of that stuff when I got sober. I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. And so the giants in Alcoholics Anonymous, the ones that came before me, they're the ones who have shown me and continue to show me and continue to inspire me to want to be a better AA, and just a better human. And I'm not all the way there because, I'm still selfish and self-centered. This morning I woke up, and I just woke up kind of like in a funk, and I was like, I don't have anything to share today, I'm just a human being, right, in a human experience. And what I know is that pain is pain, and my life ebbs and flows, and it comes and goes. But what Alcoholics Anonymous has given me is this way of life that I don't have to pick up a drink when I have bad days and when I feel bad, because how I feel is really irrelevant to what I physically do. Because what I physically do today is I get up and I go to work and I do the things that, make me a productive human in society, and I try to help other people. And I wasn't like that when I got to you people, though. So I'm going to share with you in a general way what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like today. So I grew up in Texas, right outside of Dallas. I have an older brother, younger half-sister. I don't talk a lot about my sister. My brother was kind of like my only friend growing up, so I do talk about him a little bit. And I really for a long time thought the dynamics of my family really made me the way that I was in terms of was tied to my alcoholism. But what I know today is that stuff just got me primed and ready for a drink, right? Like, it's not what makes me alcoholic. But when I got here, I just didn't understand that. And it's the process of going through the steps and learning how to write inventory and process all of those emotions and what makes me tick and why I respond the way that I do for me to understand that stuff. But I really blamed people for my life being the way that it was. And the first 8 years of my life, my parents divorced when I was like 3. I don't ever remember them being together. And then we went and lived with my father and stepmother, and she was like the wicked stepmother. My stepmom to this day is like, she's just interesting. I can only stand, I could show you a picture and you'd be like, ooh. She's just challenged. She has a lot of mental illness, and she was so scary as a little girl. I remember I would try so hard to be good, and to follow the rules and to do right, because I just wanted to not escalate things to where I knew that they could get. And then things would be flying across the room, and she was very abusive and very kind of sadistic in the way that she disciplined. And a lot of those things I've processed more as an adult in terms of how they affect me today. But at the time I was a kid, I didn't know any different, right? And again, that wasn't what made me alcoholic, but it gave me a lot of excuses to blame the fact that I needed that drink once I started drinking for me to be able to tell you this super sad story about how I grew up, because you'd feel bad for me. If I went into the details, anybody would feel bad for a human being that had to endure that, right? So it really just gave me ammunition to feed the sickness that I had, and that was my alcoholism, and that's what I used it for. I used it as a tool for this really sad story, to be a victim to the circumstances of my life. And I didn't know that was what I was doing, but today I know that's what I was doing. My brother he was like my best friend, but he also like beat me up all the time because he's the older brother, and I would just follow him around and do whatever he would dare me to do, like really crazy things. And I was like the kid who would do anything you dared me to do, because I just wanted attention, and he taught me how to fight. He taught me how to lift weights. I mean, I was like such a tomboy growing up, and so it was just kind of like this crazy dysfunctional family. Dad wasn't ever around because he was off, doing drugs and drinking, and when he was home, he was usually in a fit of rage, and Mom was alcoholic. Mom was drinking her face off at the bar, which if you asked me when I was a little girl where I wanted to be, I would say I want to go to Bentley's. That was my favorite place, was the bar that Mom bartended at. And it was like a dingy, nasty bar where your feet would stick to the ground when you would walk across of it. It was gross. And I loved that place, though. And I wanted to be a waitress when I grew up, and I would wipe the tables down, and I would get so excited when I was at Bentley's. And everybody loved me there. That was really my safe space. But I would watch TV, and I would think, they would show like these kids being abducted, and I would think, man, why can't I be abducted? It didn't matter where I was, I wanted to be somewhere else. And so like my environment was just so volatile. And when I went to school, I never felt a part of. And, I hated my red hair, and I would wrap my fingers around it and try to rip it out of my head. Like I just couldn't stand the way that I looked because I was different. And as a kid, that's what I associated as to why I was different. I didn't know that what was different, what was on in here. And I didn't know, like, I had a spiritual illness that was going on, that I lacked power, right? Like, who knows that as a kid? I didn't know any of that. I just knew all the other little girls had big blonde hair, and I had curly red hair, and I looked weird compared to them, and I would, like, rip my hair out, and I hated it, And I just always felt awkward and not a part of. So, so that was kind of the dynamics of like what set the stage for me. And when we were 8 years old, we ran away from my father's house, and we ended up going to live with my grandparents. And my grandparents are like the most normal, sweet, like just good people you'd ever meet in your entire life. My granddaddy worked at the same place his entire life, and my grandma was, for the most part, she stayed at home and took care of us. There were different times that she would have a job, but she was just like very naive, sweet woman, which was great that she was naive, but she was really, really naive. And they were just good humans. And so we went and lived with them. The only reason they had alcohol in the house was because if Grandma ever got sick. And my brother had a friend over. I was 10 years old. And the first drink I had, actually, I was 8. And I don't consider it the first real drink. Like, alcoholics have different categories for our drinks, right? Like, that was the first alcohol that I ingested, but that was with my mom, and she gave me a beer, so that didn't count in the sense of, because I didn't have the effects from alcohol. But the first time that I felt the effects from alcohol, which was for me the real drink, because that's where the magic happened. And it was when I was 10 years old, and my brother had his friend over who I had a crush on, and we got the stool and pushed it up against the stove and crawled up there. I mean, I remember everything about that night, grabbing that bottle of whiskey, running upstairs. I remember the adrenaline, the excitement of everything, and off we went. We inherently just knew how to play quarters, and it was on. And I remember that first shot, how it felt when it burnt the back of my throat, and I felt it going down, and I mean everything in my body just went warm. And when it hit the pit of my stomach, I felt like I could breathe for the first time. Everything just felt okay. And it was on, it was great. And that boy that I had a crush on that I thought was so cute, I didn't care about him anymore. I punched him, I knocked him down the stairs, and, I proceeded to, become inebriated because they dared me $20. I couldn't finish off that bottle of whiskey, and I just threw it back. And I remember laying on the couch that night, and the room was just a-spinning. And I was laying there, and my brother was saying these horrible things to me. He was just, yelling at me because I was being loud or whatever. And it was like I knew like he was saying things to me, but I couldn't hear him in here. And it was like I was so sensitive as a kid, and when people would say things and it would hurt my feelings, and I just felt like so damaged all the time, you know. And like when my stepmother, she would scream at us, like I just don't even know how to describe like what that did in terms of just shutting me down as a human. And so he was doing that, just yelling at me, saying these horrible things, but I was unaffected by it. It was like magic. It was like I was a superhero, you know. And that's all I needed to know about alcohol, you know. And from that moment until January 12th of 1992, there was never a thought process in my mind of like, I should have one of these. Like all of you people who try to control your drinking, I'm really sorry for you. That was not my personal experience. Like every time I picked up that drink, it was to like get to oblivion. And that's partially because I got to Alcoholics Anonymous so young, right? Because I didn't have some of the exterior consequences that most people would have, like a job and, you know, family members. But I drank every drink as fast as I could, as hard as I could. And that started me jumping out the window at a really early age. 11, 12, we were out the window. My first treatment center was when I was 13. What I learned in treatment is drugs are bad, just say no, you know, like, and I could comprehend that because drugs are illegal in my mind. Like, it's totally legal for a 13-year-old to throw back a bottle of whiskey, but it is totally illegal for you to do any illegal substances. Like, I don't know how I could comprehend that, but in my mind, it made sense. Like, alcohol was okay, but drugs are not okay. The age thing just didn't factor in for me. Because in case you all didn't know, I mean, y'all are looking at me like I'm silly. It's illegal both ways. You know, but in my mind, it was like, it just seemed normal. Like, I'm just doing what everybody else is doing. Now, I was also hanging out with these people who I refer to as my friends. I call them pedophiles now, but because, you know, I was 13, 14 years old, and I was hanging out with guys that were 20 years old, 30 years old, that were taking us to liquor store, buying us booze. And the more that I drank, the shadier people that I was hanging out with, you know. And by the time I was, you know, 14, I was living my life like I was a 30-year-old woman. I wasn't living the life of a 14-year-old kid having fun at parties. I wasn't going to high school parties. I wasn't going to junior high school parties. I was running the streets in Oak Cliff or whatever neighborhood I was in, trying to either, whether we were breaking into people's houses, whatever it was that we were doing to get what we needed to get to do what we needed to do. Anyway, just downward spiral, right? So, but in my mind, it made sense that I shouldn't do illegal substances, but I wasn't an alcoholic and you people were crazy. I remember they would bring, like, the AA people would come in, and I would sit with my arms crossed and my, you know, combat boots up on the table, because what also happened through that process is that I started just disassociating from all people, and that isolation wasn't just about me feeling isolated. I became isolated from the world, and I wanted you to stay away, and I shaved half my head, and I wore combat boots, and, you know, all black, and like black lips, black eyes. I was like the scary person, and nobody walks up to the scary person and says, how's your day going? You know, like, you leave the scary person alone. And so that was just one more way for me to put a barrier in between the people that I was around. And so I got out of treatment, and I was in treatment for like 6 months, because back then insurance companies would pay a lot of money, and I also kicked the window out of the treatment center, ended up in Oak Cliff, you know, stolen Jeep, all that kind of stuff. And so it was a long period that I was in treatment, but 6 months I get out. First day that I get out, I got drunk with everybody I was in treatment with, because I was not an alcoholic, you know. I didn't have a problem with alcohol. Drugs are bad. And you know, it's funny, because as I continued to drink, even though I had made this proclamation that drugs are bad, just say no, they eventually came back into my story as well, right? Like, that became disregarded, because once alcohol was in my system and I was off on the road, it didn't matter. You know, I want to feel different, and I want to change everything within me. And so I just continued down that road, and I got to a place to where I just kept half-gallon jugs of vodka hidden in my closet. I was a daily drinker. The end of my drinking, I had bleeding ulcers by the time I was 14, and it all seemed very normal to me. And in my mind, I just thought, if you people would just leave me alone. I don't remember having conversations with my grandparents. My grandmother had a surgery. She was gone for like 2 weeks. I don't remember any of it. There were so many things that happened because I pretty much lived in a blackout in the last year that I drank. Because I was just a daily, all day, morning to night, stay obliterated. And, and what happened is that no matter how much I drank, it did not kill the pain. Because that restless, irritable, and discontent feeling that I was seeking to have relief from, and that alcohol magically gave me the ability to be unaffected by you, it got to this place that no matter how much I drank, I was affected by you and I was affected by the world. It wasn't my superpower anymore, and it didn't have the ability to shield me from how I felt or what was going on. And those feelings felt like they were going to kill me. And I remember when I first got to AA, man, I literally, the first 6 months, I could swear that how I felt was going to kill me. I mean, the pain that I felt in early recovery felt as though the pain would kill me, In the end of my drinking, that's what it looked like. And there wasn't anything traumatic that happened. There had been a lot worse things that had happened before. I had tried to, I had taken bottles of pills and tried to kill myself before. But for whatever reason, I believe today that it was my higher power that gave me a moment of clarity that I experienced. And in that night, what I believe I experienced was kind of a multiple things that happened that night. One was, up to that point, I would blame my father, my stepmother, my circumstances for me being and behaving the way that I was. And if you would just leave me alone, I would be fine. That's what the story was up until that night. For whatever reason, I knew that night that I was a worthless human being. And I was a worthless human being that had nothing to offer the world. I knew that to be truth. And based upon how I was living my life, it was truth. The way that I treated people, the way that I interacted with human beings, I disregarded people completely. And so that truth was revealed to me that night. Is that for whatever reason, I had some sense of accountability that me being who and what I was my own fault. Now, I didn't make the correlation of it being attached to alcohol. I just knew that the world would be better off without me and that I was a horrible human. And it wasn't like that self-deprecating thing that we can get into, right? Like it was just this truth. And the other thing that I think that I experienced was, I think like for a second, I believe my God gave me this ability to feel love. And then it was gone. Because what I felt that night was this despair and loneliness that I've never experienced before, and it was an emptiness that I've never experienced. And I remember sitting in my grandparents' house and leaning up against that door, and I had my bottle of vodka, and I was just tilting it back, and I remember just crying. And I was so broken, and I wanted to die so bad. And but I didn't even know how to kill myself. Like I was so broken, I couldn't figure out how I could actually get rid of myself to make sure that I was dead. And in that moment, I said a prayer, and that prayer wasn't for help. That prayer was, if there is a God and if there is anything out there, please don't let me wake up in the morning. Like I knew the world would be better off without me. And at some point in time, I passed out that night, and of course I woke up the next morning because here I am today, right? And like the gift is that next day was my grandmother's birthday, and I woke up, and again, I have that same level of despair that I felt the night before. Like it had not been removed. I have this emptiness, loneliness, and desperation. And when I had been in treatment, I had met this girl, and we had become like best friends. And I had never really had a girlfriend. I always hung out with my brother and his friends, and I'd never had a girl that I'd bonded with. And I'd bonded with this girl, and we became like best friends. We did everything together. And eventually what happened was she told me, I'm not going to continue to watch you kill yourself. And I thought to myself, I don't understand what her problem is. Bye. I didn't think to myself, maybe I should slow down, maybe I should not drink. Anything that would possibly come into interfering with the lifestyle that I had was quickly dismissed, and that's what I did to her. And for whatever reason, I hadn't talked to her in about 2 or 3 months, but for whatever reason, on January 12th of 1992, she just happened to call me. And she asked me if I wanted to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And y'all, I did not want to go to that meeting. I was like, it's my grandma's birthday. Y'all, I hadn't celebrated with that woman for her birthday in God knows how many years. The fact that I actually knew it was her birthday, I'm not even sure how. But I tried to make every excuse not to go to that meeting. But something inside was like, just go. Just go, because I was so broken. And I went and I go to that meeting. And it was this little trailer, and it was the Back to Basics group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Arlington, Texas. And it was this little trailer behind a church, and it was these old guys, and it was all old guys, They were like Santa Claus beards, suspenders, like old people. And then Abby and I go walking in, with our like shaved heads and combat boots, and it's interesting because you would think like the Dallas area would have had like a big young people's movement, and they really never did. Even to this date, they don't have a huge young people's movement that ever kind of happened there, which is interesting. But nonetheless, we go into this meeting, and Abby knew some of the people, and I don't remember anything about that meeting in terms of what was said. So that takes a little bit of pressure off me tonight. If there's anybody new, I know I don't have to impress you all, right? Like, I don't remember anything from my first meeting. But what I do remember is this. I remember how people treated me. They didn't tell me, like, where the coffee pot was. Those old guys got up and they got me a cup of coffee and they brought it over to me. What I received that night was what I believe is the love of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they sat and they told me like their stories, right? They talked about themselves and they told jokes. I remember them laughing. I, on the other hand, cried through pretty much the entire meeting. I remember I just cried a lot. And back then, when that group, the white chip was a silver chip. It was the 24-hour chip, and I got one of those because Abby suggested that I get it. And I can tell you that at that meeting, I did not believe that I was alcoholic, right? I wasn't in that meeting going, yep, I'm home. I'm one of you people. That was not how I felt. I was like, I think something's mentally wrong with me, and I'm broken, and I don't know what is wrong with me. But if y'all think this is what's wrong with me, I'll come here. You're nice enough to me, right? Yeah, I can come here tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. I think I can maybe not take a drink in between now and then. Here's our phone numbers. If you feel like taking a drink, you call us. We don't care if it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, y'all are weird, And I thought, and I remember thinking, what if I did call them at 2 o'clock in the morning? Well, I can tell you at some point in time in the next 30 days, I called those old guys at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know what they did? They got their old tails out of bed, and they came and they picked me up. And I jumped out my window, and they took me to Denny's, and they got me cheeseburgers and coffee, let me smoke cigarettes like a freight train, and talk to me until I got to a place where I could go to sleep, right? I experienced the love of Alcoholics Anonymous before I even knew I was alcoholic, which is what kept me coming back, and what I believe our primary purpose is in terms of, when that alcoholic that's suffering walks into these rooms, the love that we extend to them. Because what a desperate place and a fragile place. Because I was in such a fragile place. And had I been told, you're not allowed to say this or wear this or dress this way. I mean, I was a wreck. I was a broken human, an unlovely creature, right? Half my head was shaved, combat boots, white face, black lips, black eyes. I could not say a sentence without using the F word at least 5 times. And they were unaffected. They did not treat me any differently than anybody else. They just treated me like an alcoholic that needed help. They didn't treat me like a young person. They didn't treat me like a woman. They just treated me like an alcoholic that was desperate and needed help. And thank God for that, right? There was a girl, and it's almost been a year. I think a week is going to be her year. And she was at my home group, and I remember I walked in and I saw this girl, and it was that look, that desperate look. And she couldn't look up. She's looking at the ground. she looks miserable. And I think to myself, I'm going to get that one. You know what I mean? Like, I got her. I'm going to get her after the meeting, because the meeting was just starting and I couldn't get over to her. And I was like, I'm going to get her. And then after the meeting, she was like gone. I was like, man, where is that girl? And the next night I did a meeting at, usually at my house, and that night we had it somewhere else. And I walk in and that girl is there. And I was like, oh, you were at my group, last night. And she introduced herself, and she actually told me her name was a different name than what her name actually is, which she told me her name was Sylvia, and her name's not Sylvia, but it is now forever Sylvia, because that's how I refer to her. She's programmed in my phone as Sylvia. I go to her job, I ask where Sylvia's at. I mean, she will forever be Sylvia to me. But like, I've gotten to watch this person who hated all of us. Is just angry. And I get that anger. I get that hurt. You know what I mean? And so like, those are the people that I look for. When I go to meetings, I look for that human that is hurting. Because that's my primary purpose. Because like, when I came in, they just like engulfed me and brought me in. And had that not happened, I can tell you, you'd have a different speaker tonight. Because what happened as a result of that is it kept me coming back long enough for me to get a sponsor and get into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, who took me page by page, line by line, and helped me through the process to identify my alcoholism, and to help me with what my reservations were, and because God knows I had them, right? And even up until I was about 6 months sober, I was right at 6 months sober, and I remember thinking, what about when I get married, or what about graduation? As alcoholics, we like to think about these grand things that are going to happen in our lives. And I'm thinking about all of these things that I'm going to do and how I'm going to do these things without alcohol in my life. And so like, these are the reservations that are going through. And I'm going to AA meetings, and I'm hanging out with these old people playing Pictionary on Friday nights. Like, that was my fun, was we played Pictionary on Friday nights. And I'm like, is this like... I know my life has gotten significantly better. And I've done these things that I think are really stupid. Like, I'm praying. I think that's stupid. I don't believe in this stuff. But it seems to be working, so I'm going to keep doing it. Like, I kept doing it. I thought it was silly, but I kept doing it. And I can see the results are happening, and I'm more positive, and, like, shifts are happening. Like, I'm becoming this different human being. Visually, I look like a different human being as well. Like, I stopped wearing the black lips and the black eyes and stuff. My grandmother was super excited when I started wearing normal clothes again. And so, like, this transformation was starting to happen, but, like, I'm a rebel inside, y'all. I'm going to defy anything just on a normal day. And so that stuff was fighting inside me. And I went home, and my whole family was there, and it was just a weird day. And my uncle, who was the cool uncle, he was the guy that was like, had the Harley Davidson, always had a beer in his hand. The night that I had the alcohol poisoning, and I hit the boy and knocked him down the stairs and left my DNA everywhere that night, that he was the one that they called to ask what to do with me, because they knew he would know what to do with me. I came home, and him and my aunt had a big fight, and when she came out, the phone book was opened up to treatment centers, and she thought that he had checked himself into treatment, and a week later she went looking for him, and they found his body behind the house, and he'd shot himself with a shotgun. And for me, my alcoholism, in terms of my first step, was defined in a way that it had never been defined, right? And many times in the beginning of my recovery, the old guys would say, some people die so that others can stay sober. And I remember thinking, that's a really cruel, weird thing to say to people. But that changed my recovery. Because I had started that process, and I was, had written inventory and read inventory. But that changed the tenacity in me of how I worked my program. Because I knew how he felt when he pulled the trigger. And it broke my heart that he didn't have the same gift that I had, right? And the last thing that I had said to him was, let me know if you ever want to go to a meeting. He was riding off on his Harley, and he had beers on the back, had one in his hand. Because I recognize that, right? For me, I may not kill somebody in a drunk driving car accident. I got to Alcoholics Anonymous 6 days before my 15th birthday. I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have anything to lose. I could only get kicked out of so many places, right? I didn't have a family to lose per se. I didn't have a job to lose. But what did happen is I got to a place where it made complete sense for me to take my own life. And what I know today is that one drink, that's where it'll take me. You know? I was in a wedding a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, the girls look so cute, and they have their little glasses of champagne. Like, I would look really cute with a glass of champagne. I wish I could have a glass of champagne. And, like, called my sponsor, and I was like, I would look really cute with a glass of champagne. And she was like, that Vera Wang dress would be tied around your waist by the end of the night, you know? And I was like, that's true, because, like, a glass of champagne would never do anything for me. I never wanted one of anything, you know? Like, a glass of anything doesn't do anything for this girl. That's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is release and care and freedom from boredom, right? Like, I want the promises. Like, that's what alcohol did for me, was the promises, you know, at least in the beginning. So, where am I? So that was at 6 months. And so, like, I just, like, threw myself into my step work and working really hard with my sponsor. And you know, I was told early on to stay out of relationships in my first year. I don't tell the women that I sponsor to do that because they don't listen to me when I tell them. I did take that suggestion. People say, well, you were only, you know, 15 years old, and I remind them I was acting like a 30-year-old woman. It was a big deal for me at the time, especially someone who, that developmentally where I was in my life was that my entire life was based upon my social life, you know? And so to, like, have a boyfriend or to have somebody in my life, that was, like, everything at that time in my life. And, but I took that suggestion, and it was painful, man. I remember, like, curled up in a ball, laying on the floor, just crying my eyeballs out. It was awful, you know? But what happened is, as a result of that and doing step work and creating this relationship with this higher power that would evolve and change over the course of time, is that I developed that relationship, and it didn't become centered on, you know, another human being that carried me, right? And on, like, the 365th day, I met this really nice guy, and I ended up marrying him. Shocker that we're not married today, but we're not. But it is how I ended up in North Carolina. And so he went to another high school. I continued on in school. I graduated high school. I went to my prom sober. You know, I made a lot of hard choices too, like in sobriety. You know, that girl Abby that had helped get me sober and get me my meeting, she was 2.5 years sober, and she drank again. And it was devastating. And I remember going to pick her up, and she was laying in the middle of the street in her vomit, you know. And what would continue to happen over the next 5 to 7 years is just watching her be a train wreck, right, and destroying her life, essentially. But what I had to do was take care of myself in my recovery. And I remember looking at her and thinking, I'm glad it's her and it's not me. You know, and that I had to continue on helping other people and doing the things that I needed to in my recovery. I was 3.5 years sober when I moved to North Carolina, and I thought you poor people were going to get drunk because y'all just did not do AA right. It was awful. It was such a hard transition. And it's so funny because I go home and I'm like, oh my God, it kills me when I go home. It's just so different because this has become my AA, and this has become my world. And what I will say is that my higher power knows exactly what I need all the time. Because when I got sober, I needed people who allowed me the opportunity to be, and they loved me right where I was. They loved me using the F word. They loved me when I would say I was an alcoholic and an addict. They loved me. They loved everything about me, and they just wanted me to keep coming back, and they loved me right where I was at. And I needed that, because had it been any other way, I probably wouldn't have stayed. But when I got to North Carolina, like, y'all weren't like that. And I remember people would be like, we would like for you to share, but if you could not use so much profanity, that'd be great. And I was like, that's how I express myself. I remember being so offended by being asked to not use profanity. And so, like, and I remember being really argumentative about it, probably for a couple of years. I mean, there were a couple of things that really took me some adjustment, right? Coming from, like, a big city to, like, this different environment. And But what I will say is, like, I learned this culture and respect of Alcoholics Anonymous that I'm so grateful for. And that means so much to me. And I learned about service. Because in my first couple of years, man, I went to all the conferences, I did all the fun stuff, and I just took a lot. Because I needed that, right? But when I got here, you people taught me how to give back. And I needed that. Because I believe that we don't get to stay here unless we learn how to do that. Because I look at my guys and gals that are long-term sober, and the people that I look and just go, man, I want to be like that when I grow up. And they are principled in the way that they live, and they give. They give. And so you guys taught me that. And it, and of course, like, it wasn't all good motives that got me there, right? Like, there's a bunch of different things that kind of evolved into that. But Tom was a huge part of my story that got me back connected to AA, because when he shared his passion and his love, I hadn't felt connected like that in North Carolina until I heard his talk, and I was like, it reminded me of my first home group and my people, and I was like, I need to get involved. And that's what happened, is it got me involved, and then I got involved in service, and it was just kind of a whirlwind. I want to share, like, a lot of things happen throughout the course of sobriety. Like, most of my life I've been sober, right? So I got sober so young that essentially the majority of my life I've been sober, which is awesome. But it also, I will say, has some downfalls. Like, people are like, oh, I wish I could have done that. Well, get with me later. I'll tell you some of the downfalls to that. Because there's also this struggle that is attached to that, and there's expectations that are attached to that as well. For me, that have been a struggle. But, I've experienced a lot of tragedy. I've experienced a lot of beautiful, amazing things in sobriety. A lot of health stuff. Like, I went through 3 years of chemo, 5 operations, later found out I had to have open heart surgery. Had, like, all of these kind of physical things that happened. And through those experiences, like, Alcoholics Anonymous showed up in my life. I've never gone without. And, the relationships that I have with my family, they've evolved and changed. And, that relationship and that resentment that I had with my father was deep-rooted. And there was so much hurt and so much anger. It took a long time. And I say that to say that if you have a resentment that you think that'll never be mendable, I get that. I remember being 7 years sober and hearing a speaker and thinking, I'll never have that kind of an experience. It'll never happen. Because at 7 years sober, I was still sitting there thinking, I can't wait till my father dies and he's all alone. And he gets to die alone. And he gets to be abandoned the way that everybody in his life that he abandoned. I wanted him to experience that. And what I can tell you is that it hurts my heart that I felt that way today. There was a lot of damage there. I hated my stepmother. I would think about, how I could, physically kill her. And I would have, homicidal thoughts. I'd lay in bed and just fantasize about it. 7 years sober. And people would tell me, keep writing inventory about it. And what I can tell you is, keep writing inventory. Because as long as I'm putting pen to paper, I'm staying in the process of a solution. And I remember thinking, this inventory is not going to fix this problem. But what happened to me was I just got mad again. It was around 7 years, and I got mad again, and I hit that wall. And I wasn't ready to take a drink, but I was at a place I just wanted to go to bed and not wake up again, And I was mad at my dad again. And we really didn't have much of a relationship. There would be periods where we would speak, and then he would do something I didn't like, and I would stop talking to him again. That's kind of the nature of the relationship that we had. And something had happened, and I remember just crying, and I called my sponsor, and she said, well, when you're ready to write some inventory, give me a call. Click. If you don't feel like killing your sponsor, get a new one, because it has worked really well for me to need to write inventory on my own sponsor, And so I remember that day I was so mad, and I hit my knees, and I was so mad I was crying, like that mad cry. And I hit my knees and I was crying. And I had this flash in my mind, and that flash was my dad's eyes. And I remembered where that came from, and that flash was from when I was 8 years old, and my brother and I had ran away, and we had to go back into the house to get our things from his house. Now, I don't know what it's like when you tell your kid you don't want to live with them anymore. But that day I saw his eyes, and it was this sadness, right? I mean, when I go home and my dog doesn't treat me the way that I want her to, I'm like, why are you not like wetting yourself? You're so excited to see me. You know what I mean? Like, I want her to be so excited to see me. And so I don't know what that is. I don't have kids, so I don't know what it means when your child says, I don't want to live with you anymore. But I know that it changed him and it damaged him. Now I was 8. Was that my intention? Absolutely not. And at that moment, was I thinking like, oh, I owe my father an amends for this? No, I was leaving a really toxic relationship in terms of environment. But what it did do was that my higher power gave me this little bitty sliver of opportunity to open up that door and to have compassion for someone who I hated with everything in me. And so I started writing that inventory, and I started taking those suggestions. And my sponsor said, I want you to write him a letter every month. And I started writing him a letter. And then I started, after a year and a half of writing him letters every month, which I hated to do because sometimes I didn't know what to say. And what I've learned from you people is be consistent. And when you tell somebody you're going to do something, you do it. When you commit to doing something, you do it. Because that has to do with my self-worth too. You know, that was one of the things that this year I learned a lot about, my commitments to myself. You know, you people taught me how to keep my commitments to you and how to keep my commitments to the group. But I have commitments to myself too, because taking care of myself is important. You know, making sure like I take care of like how I eat and how I, you know, exercise and take care of, those are commitments that I have to my own self-worth of like, it's important, right? And that was just kind of one of the things I went through this year. But like, y'all taught me first how to do that with other people and how to do that with the group. And so I started doing this with Dad. I started, you know, being consistent. And then I started calling him. And so when I had open heart surgery, this is over like a 2.5 year period, I called to tell him I was having this surgery, and he said, I'll be there. And I was like, whatever, he's not going to show up. There's no way. You know, I knew he wasn't going to come. And before that surgery, I had dinner with my brother, my stepmother, my father for the first time since I was 8 years old. And before I had that surgery, something in the time of that 2.5 years of writing inventory, writing cards to him, and doing my part in opening up to God's will in terms of what he would have me be as a daughter, it changed who I was. And that resentment was gone. And when I looked at him and I told him he deserved to have a better daughter than the daughter that I had showed up to be, because I was acting like an 8-year-old little girl that was hurt. You know, I learned how to act like a 26-year-old woman who was showing up to be a good daughter. And I looked at him and told him he deserved a better daughter. And from that moment until this, you know, of my father's children, he says, you're the only one I can count on. Like, that's weird, right? Super weird. And a couple years later, you know, he would say things like, why don't you come home? You're a Texas girl. And had he said that to me before, I would have said, you're just trying to control me. And I really would have thought, you're just trying to control me. And that was just my dad's way of saying, I love you, I miss you. If you were here more often, we could do things together. Because my dad doesn't know how to say, I love you, I miss you. And he probably never will. You know, he'll never be able to say those things. But you people taught me how to listen to him and taught me how to have a relationship with him. And also allow him to be who and what he is. Because I can tell you, my dad hasn't really changed in terms of the human that he is, right? He goes on these tirades on the phone. And I get to just be the person that listens. Because my higher power wants me to be a good daughter. And I have a role for that, what it means to be a good daughter. And I had to think about other people. I had to think like, what does it mean for Debbie to be a good daughter to her dad? And I'd write down, like, what does that mean? And what does it mean to be, like, a good sponsee? And I'd write that down. Like, these roles in terms of in my life and what God intends for me to be in these roles. And those are the things that define my relationships, you know, my ideals for living, you know, what my God intends for me to be. And that was through the process of inventory, right? And as a result, like, you know, my dad knows that I have this surgery, and he is like, if you need me to come, I'll come. I'm like, Dad, I'm good. You know, like, I got a tribe of women that's going to take care of me, but thank you. But to be able to have a relationship that I never really thought was possible is awesome today. My mom is sober 15, almost 16 years. Next week will be her 16th year, and she's coming in town Monday to be with me and to take care of me while I recover and to celebrate her 16th year sober. What's really awesome about that is that even when my mom was 5 years sober, I remember thinking, I'm never going to get to have a mom that's able to be a mom in my life, you know, and eventually you people taught her how to be a mom. And I went through a really hard time about 8 years ago, and my mom started showing up being a mom. And it's not just that Alcoholics Anonymous has given me this life, it's given my mom this life, and we get to share our recovery. And so, like, when we go on trips with the rest of the family, we have, like, you know, our solitude in one another, because it's like mayhem. I mean, really, I would give the rest of the family loads of alcohol just to, like, be able to deal with them, you know. And so, like, all of our families are dysfunctional and crazy, right? But I have these awesome relationships. You know, my grandparents passed away. They were my oaks. They were like these people that were fantastic in my life. And some of my greatest heroes I've gotten to be with and hold their hands when they've passed away. You know, one of the gifts of recovery. One of my best friends passed away about 4 years ago. You know, I used to not know how to be a friend. One of my biggest amends that I had to make when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous was this girl I'd taken to a party, and my brother passed around a basket because nobody liked her, and everybody threw money in it. And my brother came up to me, and he handed me the money, and he was like, "This is yours. You go beat her up, and if you don't, then I'm going to beat you up." And so this girl that I'd taken to the party, I just, like, clocked her, knocked her out, you know, split her eye open. Like, that's the kind of friend that I was, right? And you people taught me how to be a friend. You people taught me how to not be a mean girl. You people taught me how to show up and to be there for people. And one of the things that people will say about me is I am loyal, you know, and I love my tribe. I love my people, and I love you guys. Like, this is one of my second home groups. So to be able to be here with you in celebration, it's important to celebrate recovery, because a lot of times I think it's really easy to take for granted, you know, my sobriety. A lot of times it's been 27 years. You know, most days I don't think about picking up a drink, right? But, like, talking about it tonight and talking about that emptiness and that loneliness, I haven't felt that since January 12th of 92. I've felt a lot of things, and I've gone through a lot of things, but I've gone through it sober, you know, and we get to celebrate this beautiful life, and what we get to give back. You know, I have women in my life that are amazing, and I get to watch grow up and become just like beautiful humans. So thank you guys for my recovery and allowing me to be here with y'all. Thanks.